The stagecoach lurched to a halt, sending Beatrice Parker forward in her seat, with such force that she nearly collided with the gentleman sitting across from her. Through the dust-coated window, she could make out the wooden buildings of Eagle Pass, Texas, her final destination after a grueling 3-week journey from Boston. Her stomach twisted with nerves as she clutched the wrinkled letter from Warren Xander, the man who would soon be her husband. The year was 1875, and at 22 years of age, Beatrice had made the most daring decision of her sheltered life. The daughter of a failed merchant who had died leaving nothing but debts, she had answered an advertisement in the Boston Herald seeking a respectable lady of good character and modest expectations to share the life of a Texas rancher. "Eagle Pass, folks, end of the line," the driver called out. Beatrice gathered her reticule and the small carpet bag containing her most immediate necessities. Her larger trunk containing nearly everything she owned in the world had been secured to the back of the coach. She waited patiently as the other passengers disembarked before carefully stepping down into the dusty street. The heat hit her like a physical blow. April in Texas was already hotter than the height of summer back home. Sweat immediately beaded on her forehead beneath her bonnet as she scanned the busy street for the man whose tintype photograph she'd carried across the country. "Miss Parker," a gruff voice called. She turned to see a weathered man in his 50s holding a slate with her name scrawled on it. "Yes, I am Beatrice Parker," she replied, forcing a smile. "Are you Mr. Xander?" The man let out a harsh laugh. "No, madam, name's Tom Riley. I drive for the Xander Ranch. Mr. Xander sent me to fetch you." Oh, Beatrice couldn't quite hide her disappointment. "Very well. Just let me collect my trunk and I shall be ready to depart." The driver was already unloading luggage from the coach. "Pardon, madam, but there's no trunk for Eagle Pass, just this here carpet bag." He handed her the small bag she had already retrieved. "That's impossible," Beatrice said, her voice rising with panic. "I had a large trunk. It was tied securely to the back of the coach when we left San Antonio." The driver scratched his chin. "We did lose some baggage crossing the Nueces River yesterday. Water was higher than expected." "Might have been yours that went downriver." The blood drained from Beatrice's face. Everything she owned, her clothes, her mother's locket, her father's Bible, the small dowry she'd managed to scrape together, gone. She swayed slightly on her feet. "Steady there, miss," Tom Riley said, taking her elbow. "Not feeling faint, are you, my trunk?" she whispered. "Everything I own." "Now, don't you worry about that," Riley said awkwardly. "These things happen out west. Mr. Xander will sort it all out." Beatrice wanted to cry, to scream, to demand that someone recover her possessions immediately, but she knew it would be futile. Her things were likely scattered across miles of wilderness or at the bottom of a river. With her last shred of dignity, she straightened her spine. "Yes, of course." "Shall we proceed to the ranch, Mr. Riley?" Tom Riley looked relieved at her composure. "That we shall, miss. Wagons this way." The ride to the Xander Ranch was conducted mostly in silence. Beatrice was too numb with shock and despair to make conversation, and Tom Riley seemed content to focus on navigating the rutted dirt road. As they traveled, the town gave way to open countryside, vast expanses of scrubland dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. In the distance, hills rose like blue shadows against the horizon. After nearly 2 hours, Riley pointed ahead. "Xander Ranch, miss. One of the finest spreads in the county." Beatrice peered ahead to see a large 2-story house painted white, with a broad porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and beyond them stretched fenced pastureland where cattle grazed. Under different circumstances, she might have felt relieved at the evident prosperity of her future husband's home. As they approached, A tall figure emerged from the barn and strode toward the wagon. Beatrice's heart quickened as she recognized the man from the photograph, Warren Xander. In person, he was even more imposing, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly over his collar. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to physical labor. "That's the boss," Riley confirmed unnecessarily. The wagon rolled to a stop, and Warren Xander approached, removing his hat to reveal eyes as blue as a summer sky. He looked to be in his early 30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. "Miss Parker?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a hint of the South. "Yes, Mr. Xander," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly despite her bedraggled appearance. He offered his hand to help her down from the wagon. His palm was calloused but his touch gentle as she descended. Up close, she noticed a thin scar running along his jawline. "Welcome to Eagle Pass," he said. "I hope your journey wasn't too arduous." Before she could respond, Riley interjected, "There's been a bit of trouble, boss. Miss Parker's trunk went missing when the stage crossed the nooses. All she's got is that little bag there." Warren Xander's expression hardened momentarily before he schooled it back to neutrality. "I see. That's unfortunate." He turned back to Beatrice. "Don't worry yourself about it, Miss Parker. You'll want for nothing here." The simple declaration, delivered without fanfare, nearly broke Beatrice's composure. She blinked rapidly to dispel the threatening tears. "You are very kind, sir, but you must understand everything I own was in that trunk. My clothes, my personal possessions, even the modest sum I brought as my dowry. Money," he waved a dismissive hand. "I didn't ask for you to bring money, Miss Parker." "Perhaps not, but I cannot come to you as a pauper," she insisted, her pride flaring. "I should return to Boston immediately." Warren Xander's eyebrows rose. "With what funds? And to what purpose? You said yourself everything you own is gone." His blunt logic stung, but Beatrice couldn't deny the truth of it. She had nothing and nowhere to return to. Her cousins in Boston had made it clear that her welcome in their home had expired. I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. Warren's expression softened. "Miss Parker, Beatrice. May I call you Beatrice?" At her nod, he continued, "I understand this isn't how you imagined beginning your new life. But I meant what I said. You'll want for nothing here. We can replace clothes and necessities. As for sentimental items, I'm truly sorry for your loss." His sincerity was evident, and something in Beatrice responded to it. Still, she couldn't quite suppress her dismay. "Mr. Xander, I feel I should be honest. I am. Not at my best at the moment. Perhaps you would prefer to reconsider our arrangement given the circumstances." Warren studied her face for a long moment, then shook his head. "I chose you based on your letters, Miss Parker, not your possessions. Unless you've changed your mind about me." "No," she admitted. "But then there's nothing more to discuss on that front," he interrupted gently. "Now, you must be exhausted. Let me show you to the house where you can rest and refresh yourself." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Beatrice placed her hand upon it. As they walked toward the house, she was acutely aware of her dusty, travel-worn appearance beside his clean, if work-worn, attire. "The wedding isn't scheduled until Sunday," Warren explained as they climbed the porch steps. "That gives you 3 days to settle in and become acquainted with your new home. Mrs. Hollister, my housekeeper, has prepared the guest room for you until then." Beatrice nearly stumbled at this reminder of how quickly her life was changing. In 3 days, she would marry this virtual stranger. The thought both terrified and oddly comforted her. The interior of the house surprised her with its refinement. Though not lavish, the furnishings were of good quality, and everything was scrupulously clean. Landscape paintings adorned the walls, and a large bookcase filled one corner of the parlor. "You have a lovely home," she said sincerely. "Thank you. It was my mother's pride. She passed 4 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Beatrice replied automatically, then added with genuine feeling, "I lost my mother when I was 16. Warren nodded in understanding. "Mrs. Hollister," he called. A plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the back of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "There you are. And this must be Miss Parker. Beatrice, this is Mrs. Edna Hollister, who keeps this house running smoothly. Mrs. Hollister, Miss Beatrice Parker." The older woman smiled warmly. "Welcome, my dear. We're so pleased you've arrived safely." Warren cleared his throat. "I'm afraid Miss Parker's trunk was lost during the journey. She'll need some necessities right away." Mrs. Hollister's eyes widened. "Oh, you poor thing. Not to worry, we'll sort something out. My niece Abigail is about your size. I'm sure she'd be happy to loan you a few things until we can get to the mercantile." "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly," Beatrice began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister interrupted. "That's how we survive out here, by helping each other. Now, let me show you to your room so you can rest." "You look dead on your feet, poor lamb." Warren nodded. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Hollister's capable hands. I have ranch business to attend to, but I'll see you at supper if you feel up to joining us." "Thank you, Mr. Xander," Beatrice replied formally, suddenly shy again now that the initial crisis had passed. His blue eyes crinkled slightly. "Warren, please. We're to be married in 3 days after all." "Warren," she repeated softly, testing the name on her lips. Something flickered in his eyes before he nodded brusquely, replaced his hat, and strode back outside. Mrs. Hollister led Beatrice upstairs to a pleasant room with a large window overlooking the ranch. A brass bed with a patchwork quilt dominated the space, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin stood in one corner. "I've laid out some soap and towels," the housekeeper said. "I'll bring up hot water right away, and then you should rest. Later, we'll see about getting you some clothes." Left alone, Beatrice sank onto the bed, the enormity of her situation finally overwhelming her. She had traveled thousands of miles to marry a man she knew only through letters. She had lost everything she owned in the world, and in 3 days she would become Mrs. Warren Xander, mistress of this ranch, wife to a man who was still essentially a stranger. For the first time since leaving Boston, she allowed herself to cry. By the time Mrs. Hollister returned with the hot water, Beatrice had composed herself. The older woman pretended not to notice her red-rimmed eyes, simply setting down the steaming pitcher and explaining that she would return in an hour with some borrowed clothes. The warm water revived Beatrice's spirits somewhat, washing away the dust of travel. She changed into her only spare blouse, which she had fortunately kept in her carpet bag, and did her best to smooth the wrinkles from her skirt. True to her word, Mrs. Hollister returned with an armful of clothing. "These are from Abigail. She said you're welcome to them for as long as you need. The green dress might need taking in at the waist, but the blue should fit well enough. Please convey my deepest gratitude to your niece," Beatrice said sincerely. "You can thank her yourself on Sunday. She'll be at the wedding," Mrs. Hollister replied. "Now, supper will be at 6. The master usually eats with the ranch hands in the cookhouse, but tonight he'll dine in the house with you." After the housekeeper departed, Beatrice tried on the blue dress. It was simpler than the fashions she'd worn in Boston, but the fabric was good quality, and the fit wasn't too bad, though the hem was an inch too short. She did her best with her hair, wishing for her missing combs and pins. At 6 o'clock precisely, she made her way downstairs. Warren was waiting in the parlor, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He rose when she entered, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You look lovely, Beatrice," he said. "That blue suits your coloring." She blushed slightly. "Thank you. It's borrowed, as you know." "Your Mrs. Hollister has been very kind." "She's not usually so accommodating," Warren replied with a hint of amusement. "You've clearly made a good impression." They moved to the dining room where a simple but appetizing meal awaited them: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and greens. Warren held her chair for her before taking his own seat at the head of the table. "I hope the food is to your liking," he said as they began eating. "It's not fancy city fare, but Mrs. Hollister is an excellent cook." "It's delicious," Beatrice assured him truthfully. After weeks of stagecoach station meals, this is a feast. A somewhat awkward silence fell as they ate. Beatrice tried to think of something to say that wouldn't sound inane. "Your ranch seems very prosperous," she finally ventured. Warren nodded. "We've had some good years. Started with just 100 head of cattle, and now we're up to nearly 2,000. Got 12 men working for me full-time, more during roundup." "That's impressive," she said sincerely. "Your letters mentioned that you came to Texas after the war." A shadow crossed his face. "Yes. There wasn't much left for me in Virginia afterward. My father's plantation was burned and he died soon after. I came west with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." "And now you have all this," Beatrice observed. "You must be very proud of what you've accomplished." "I've been fortunate," he said modestly, "and I've worked hard, but a man reaches a point where he wants more than just work." His eyes met hers directly. "I want a family, Beatrice, a wife, children, a real home." His candor took her breath away. That's what I want too," she admitted quietly. Warren's expression softened. "I know this isn't easy for you. Coming all this way to marry a stranger, losing your belongings. If you need more time before the wedding, I would understand." Beatrice considered his offer, touched by his consideration. "That's very kind of you, Warren, but I don't see what purpose it would serve. We would still be strangers a week from now or a month. Perhaps the best way to become acquainted is to begin our life together as planned." A smile transformed his serious face. "I was hoping you would say that." "However," Beatrice added, feeling emboldened, "I would like to know more about you. Your letters told me about the ranch and your expectations for a wife, but very little about yourself as a person." Warren looked slightly taken aback by her directness, then thoughtful. "That's a fair request. What would you like to know? What makes you happy? What do you enjoy when you're not working?" He considered this for a moment. "I enjoy reading history mostly and some poetry, riding when it's not work, playing chess, though I rarely have a worthy opponent." His eyes twinkled suddenly. "Do you play?" "As a matter of fact, I do," Beatrice replied. "My father taught me. He said it would improve my strategic thinking." "Then we shall have to play sometime soon," Warren said. "And what about you, Beatrice? What brings you joy?" The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since she'd had the luxury of pursuing pleasures. "I love music," she said after a moment. "I used to play the piano, though I'm out of practice. And I enjoy gardening. We had a small garden behind our house in Boston." Warren's expression brightened. "My mother had a beautiful garden. It's been neglected since her passing. Mrs. Hollister has kept up with the kitchen herbs, but the flower beds are overgrown. Perhaps you might like to restore it." "I would enjoy that very much," Beatrice said, warming to the idea. "And there's a piano in the parlor," Warren added. "It hasn't been played in years, likely needs tuning, but it's yours if you wish to use it." "Truly," Beatrice felt a surge of gratitude. "That would be wonderful." The rest of the meal passed more comfortably, with conversation flowing more naturally. Beatrice learned that Warren had served as a cavalry officer in the Confederate Army, had a fondness for apple pie, and disliked politics. In turn, She told him about her childhood in Boston, her love of the ocean, and her skill with needlework. By the time they finished eating, Beatrice felt she had at least begun to know the man she would marry. He was direct but not unkind, intelligent but unpretentious, and he seemed genuinely interested in her comfort and happiness. After dinner, Warren surprised her by retrieving a chessboard from a cabinet. "Would you care for a game?" Beatrice smiled. "I would like that very much, though I warn you, I may be rusty." They set up the board in the parlor, and Beatrice discovered that Warren was an excellent player, thoughtful and strategic. She lost the first game but put up enough of a fight to earn his respect. "You play well," he commented as they reset the pieces. "Most women of my acquaintance consider chess too taxing for the female mind." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" Warren met her gaze steadily. "I think intelligence has nothing to do with whether one wears trousers or skirts." She couldn't help but smile at that. A progressive view for a Texas rancher. "Perhaps," he conceded, "or perhaps just common sense. My mother ran this ranch alongside my father for 20 years. She could calculate the profit on a cattle sale faster than any man I've ever met." They played a second game, which ended in a draw. By then, it was growing late, and Beatrice couldn't suppress a yawn. "Forgive me," Warren said immediately. "You've had a long journey, and here I am keeping you up with chess." "I've enjoyed it," Beatrice assured him as she rose, "but I am rather tired." Warren stood as well, suddenly looking uncertain. "Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, I thought I might show you around the ranch. And perhaps we could ride into town to visit the mercantile. You'll need some things of your own, not just borrowed items." "I would like that," Beatrice said, then hesitated. "But I'm afraid I have no money to purchase anything." Warren frowned slightly. "You're to be my wife, Beatrice. Your needs are my responsibility now." "That's very generous, but it's not generosity," he interrupted firmly. "It's how things should be. I promised you wouldn't want for anything here, and I meant it." His tone brooked no argument, and Beatrice found she lacked the energy to insist. "Thank you," she said simply. "Good night, Warren." "Good night, Beatrice. Sleep well." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Beatrice reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been on a stagecoach, nervous but hopeful about her future. Then disaster had struck, and she'd nearly lost her courage. Now, somehow, she felt a cautious optimism returning. Warren Xander was not what she had expected. He was better, in many ways. Perhaps losing her trunk had been a blessing in disguise. It had shown her immediately what kind of man Warren was: generous, understanding, and honorable. A man who kept his promises. For the first time since arriving in Eagle Pass, Beatrice allowed herself to truly hope that this marriage might bring her the happiness she had secretly longed for. The next morning, Beatrice woke to sunshine streaming through her window. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She was in Eagle Pass, Texas, at the ranch of her soon-to-be husband, with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and the contents of a small carpetbag. A knock at the door roused her from these thoughts. "Miss Parker, I've brought hot water and breakfast," called Mrs. Hollister's cheerful voice. "Come in, please," Beatrice called, sitting up and quickly straightening her borrowed nightgown. The housekeeper entered with a tray and a steaming pitcher. "Good morning, my dear. I thought you might like to eat in your room this morning after your long journey." "How thoughtful, thank you," Beatrice said sincerely. The tray contained scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee, far more substantial than the light breakfast she was accustomed to. "Mr. Xander is already out seeing to the cattle," Mrs. Hollister informed her as she poured water into the basin. "He said to tell you he'd be back mid-morning to take you into town." "I'll be ready," Beatrice promised. After eating her fill and washing up, Beatrice donned the borrowed blue dress again, doing her best to arrange her hair neatly with the few pins she had. She ventured downstairs, where Mrs. Hollister was kneading bread dough in the kitchen. "Ah, there you are. Did you sleep well?" the housekeeper asked. "Very well, thank you. The bed is most comfortable." Mrs. Hollister beamed. "I made that quilt myself, you know. Now, is there anything I can help you with before the master returns?" Beatrice hesitated. "I was wondering. Mr. Xander mentioned a garden that his mother kept. Might I see it?" "Of course." Mrs. Hollister wiped her hands on her apron. "It's out back, through that door and past the summer kitchen. It's gone wild since Mrs. Xander passed, I'm afraid. I do my best with the herbs, but flowers aren't my specialty." Beatrice followed her directions and found herself in a walled garden behind the house. Even overgrown, she could see that it had once been beautiful. Rose bushes stretched untamed over arbors, and flower beds were now tangled with both perennials and weeds. A small fountain in the center had gone dry, its basin filled with leaves. Despite its neglected state, Beatrice could immediately envision what it could be again. She knelt to examine some of the plants, identifying lavender, daylilies, and what appeared to be peony bushes badly in need of pruning. So absorbed was she in her exploration that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her. "I see you found my mother's garden," Warren said. Beatrice looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "It's lovely, even in its current state. With some work it could be magnificent again." Warren offered his hand to help her up. "It would please me to see it restored," he said quietly. "My mother loved this place. She used to sit out here in the evenings, reading or just watching the sunset." His voice held a note of melancholy that tugged at Beatrice's heart. "Tell me about her," she invited. Warren's expression softened. "She was remarkable, strong, intelligent, kind. My father brought her out here as a young bride when this was all wilderness. Together they built the ranch from nothing. After he died, I was 15, then she kept it going, taught me everything I know about ranching." "She sounds like an extraordinary woman," Beatrice said sincerely. "She was." Warren cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with showing too much emotion. "But that's enough about the past. I've come to take you to town if you're ready." "I am," Beatrice confirmed. "Though I feel badly about imposing on your generosity." Warren gave her a stern look. "We've discussed this, Beatrice. It's not an imposition." She decided not to argue further. "Very well, I am at your disposal." A slight smile curved his lips. "That's better. The buggy's out front." The journey into Eagle Pass took about half an hour. As they traveled, Warren pointed out features of the landscape and told her about neighboring ranches. Beatrice was struck by the vastness of the countryside, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. "It's beautiful in its way," she commented, looking out over the rolling hills dotted with live oaks, "though very different from what I'm accustomed to." "It grows on you," Warren said. "I couldn't imagine living anywhere else now." Eagle Pass was busier than it had appeared when Beatrice arrived the previous day. The main street was lined with businesses: a hotel, several saloons, a bank, a barber shop, and the large general mercantile that was their destination. As Warren helped her down from the buggy, Beatrice was acutely aware of curious glances from passers-by. "I believe we're attracting attention," she murmured. Warren shrugged. "Small town. Everyone knows everyone's business, and they're all curious about my mail-order bride." Beatrice winced slightly at the term, though she knew it was accurate. Warren noticed her reaction and frowned. "I apologize. That was thoughtless of me." "No, it's all right," Beatrice assured him. "It's what I am, after all." "You're the future Mrs. Xander," he corrected firmly, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The mercantile was impressively well stocked for a frontier town. Bolts of fabric lined one wall, ready-made clothing another. Glass cases displayed jewelry, watches, and other finery, while shelves held everything from tools to tinned foods to patent medicines. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, hurried forward when they entered. "Mr. Xander, a pleasure to see you, sir, and this must be your intended. George, this is Miss Beatrice Parker. Beatrice, George Finley owns this establishment." "A pleasure, Miss Parker. Welcome to Eagle Pass." Mr. Finley beamed at her. "What can I help you with today?" Warren took charge. "Miss Parker's trunk was lost during her journey. She needs a complete wardrobe: day dresses, a church dress, undergarments, nightclothes, stockings, shoes, and personal items: brushes, combs, whatever ladies require." Mr. Finley nodded eagerly. Of course. Mrs. Finley can assist with the more intimate selections." He gestured to a plump woman who was arranging ribbons nearby. "Martha, dear, come help Miss Parker with her selections." Mrs. Finley proved to be a friendly, talkative woman who efficiently guided Beatrice through the store, helping her select practical cotton dresses for everyday wear, a blue silk for church and special occasions, and the necessary undergarments. A ready-made pair of boots was found that fit tolerably well, and a pair of dainty slippers for indoor wear. Throughout the process, Warren remained nearby, authorizing every purchase without hesitation. When Beatrice tried to select the plainest, least expensive options, he often intervened to suggest something of better quality. "The green wool would be more practical than the brown," he said at one point. "It will wear better." "But it's nearly twice the price," Beatrice protested quietly. Warren fixed her with a firm look. "I can afford it, Beatrice. Please choose what you like, not what you think will save me money." When they reached the jewelry counter, Beatrice tried to skip past it, but Warren stopped her. "You'll need a few accessories, and a wedding ring, of course." Her heart fluttered at the mention of a wedding ring. "I don't require anything elaborate." Warren studied the selection in the glass case. "What do you prefer, gold or silver?" "Gold is traditional, I suppose," she said hesitantly. He nodded to Mr. Finley. "May we see the gold bands, please?" The selection was limited, but Warren helped her select a simple gold band that fit her slender finger. As Mr. Finley returned it to its box, Beatrice's eye was caught by a small pendant, a gold heart set with a tiny pearl. Warren noticed her interest. "That as well," he told Mr. Finley. "Oh no, really, the ring is quite enough," Beatrice protested. Warren ignored her, taking the pendant from Mr. Finley and holding it up to her throat. "It suits you. Consider it a wedding present." The gesture was so unexpectedly romantic that Beatrice found herself speechless. She simply nodded, a blush heating her cheeks. By the time they had finished their shopping, the buggy was laden with packages. Warren settled the substantial bill without comment, then suggested they take lunch at the hotel before returning to the ranch. The hotel dining room was the most refined establishment in Eagle Pass, with tablecloths and actual china plates. As they ate their steak and potatoes, Beatrice became increasingly aware of curious glances and whispers from other diners. "Is something amiss?" she asked Warren quietly. He glanced around the room, then back at her with a wry smile. "Just the local gossip mill at work. Most of them have never seen me in female company before. They're probably laying bets on whether you'll run screaming back to Boston before Sunday." "Is that what you expect?" Beatrice asked, suddenly serious. Warren met her gaze directly. "No, I think you're made of sterner stuff than that." His assessment pleased her more than it should have. "I hope to prove worthy of your confidence." Their eyes held for a long moment before Warren cleared his throat and looked away. "There's something I should tell you," he said, his tone more somber. "About my past." Beatrice set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "Yes, During the war, I was captured at Gettysburg. Spent 18 months in a Union prison camp before the surrender. His jaw tightened at the memory. It changed me. Sometimes I wake in the night thinking I'm still there, or loud noises might startle me more than they should. Beatrice's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice. "I'm sorry you endured such suffering," she said softly. Warren shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her sympathy. "Many had it worse. I just wanted you to know before we're married, so you won't be taken by surprise." "Thank you for trusting me with this," Beatrice said sincerely. "Is there anything I can do if these memories trouble you?" Warren looked surprised by the question, as though he hadn't considered that she might want to help. "Just be patient, I suppose, and know that it's not your fault if I seem distant sometimes." "I can do that," Beatrice promised. The rest of their meal passed in more comfortable conversation. Warren asked about her life in Boston, and Beatrice found herself telling him about her father's business failures and the cold charity of her relatives after his death. "They made it very clear that their hospitality had limits," she explained. "When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like Providence. And now, after losing your trunk and seeing what you're getting into," Warren asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Beatrice considered the question honestly. "I won't pretend I wasn't devastated yesterday, but you've been more than kind, and I find I'm looking forward to our future together, Warren." Something in his expression shifted, a softening around the eyes, a slight easing of tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. "As am I, Beatrice, as am I." On the journey back to the ranch, they fell into a comfortable silence. Beatrice was lost in thought, considering the strange path that had led her here and the man beside her who would soon be her husband. She had come to Texas expecting a business arrangement security in exchange for running his household and bearing his children. But there were hints of something more developing between them, a mutual respect, perhaps even the beginnings of genuine affection. When they reached the ranch, Warren insisted on carrying all her packages upstairs himself. "Mrs. Hollister will help you put everything away," he said as he deposited the last bundle on her bed. "I need to check on a situation with the cattle, but I'll see you at supper." "Thank you, Warren, for everything," Beatrice said sincerely. He paused in the doorway, regarding her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Beatrice. This is your home now." After he left, Mrs. Hollister appeared to help her organize her new possessions. My, the master didn't stint, did he?" the housekeeper commented, admiring the quality of the fabric in the new dresses. "He was far too generous," Beatrice agreed, still a bit overwhelmed. Mrs. Hollister gave her a shrewd look. "It's not just generosity, my dear. The master wants you to be happy here." She paused in hanging a dress. "This ranch hasn't had a woman's touch since his mother passed. He needs you, more than he probably realizes." The idea that Warren might need her not just as a convenient wife, but as herself was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Tell me more about him," Beatrice requested as they worked. "How long have you known him?" "Since he first came to Texas, right after the war," Mrs. Hollister replied. "My late husband and I had a small place nearby. When Thomas, that was my husband, died of the fever in '68, Mr. Xander offered me a position here. He's a good man, Miss Parker. Hard-working, honest to a fault, not one for shows of emotion, but he feels things deeply." "He mentioned he was in a prison camp during the war," Beatrice ventured. Mrs. Hollister's expression grew solemn. "Yes, he doesn't speak of it often, but I know it haunts him still. When he first came west, he was like a ghost, so thin you could see through him, with eyes that had seen too much. This ranch saved him, gave him purpose. And now he wants a wife," Beatrice murmured, more to herself than to the housekeeper. "A man needs more than work to fill his life, Mrs. Hollister said sagely. He needs someone to share it with. That evening, Beatrice wore one of her new dresses to supper, a simple navy blue cotton with white piping. She had arranged her hair more carefully with her new combs and fastened the gold heart pendant around her neck. Warren's eyes widened appreciatively when she entered the dining room. "You look lovely," he said, rising to hold her chair. "Thank you. It's nice to feel properly dressed again." They ate the excellent meal Mrs. Hollister had prepared, discussing the events of the day. Warren told her about a problem with one of the wells that supplied water to the western pasture, while Beatrice described her plans for beginning work on the garden. "There's a tool shed near the garden," Warren informed her. "You'll find everything you need there: spades, pruning shears, watering cans." "Wonderful. I'll start tomorrow if that's agreeable." "The garden is yours to do with as you please," Warren assured her. "Though you might wait until after the wedding, there will be plenty of time." The mention of the wedding sent a flutter of nerves through Beatrice's stomach. It was hard to believe that in just 2 days she would be a married woman. After dinner, they played chess again, with Beatrice managing to win a closely contested game. Warren proved to be a gracious loser, conceding defeat with a rueful smile. "You play too defensively," Beatrice told him as they put away the pieces. "Sometimes you need to risk more to gain the advantage." Warren gave her a considering look. "A philosophy for chess or for life?" "Perhaps both," she replied thoughtfully. The day before the wedding dawned bright and clear. Beatrice spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly, trying to familiarize herself with what would soon be her domain. The house was larger than it had first appeared, with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a study, parlor, and dining room downstairs, plus the spacious kitchen where Mrs. Hollister reigned supreme. After lunch, she ventured out to examine the garden more closely, making mental notes of what would need to be done to restore it. She was on her knees, examining a rose bush that showed promising signs of life beneath its overgrown exterior, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Warren rode into the yard on a magnificent black stallion, accompanied by another man on a chestnut gelding. They dismounted near the garden gate, and Warren spotted her immediately. "Beatrice, I'd like you to meet someone." He beckoned her over. Brushing dirt from her hands, she approached the 2 men. Warren's companion was younger, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sandy hair and an open, friendly face. "Beatrice, this is Daniel Lawson, my foreman. Daniel, Miss Beatrice Parker, my bride-to-be." Daniel removed his hat, revealing a shock of unruly hair. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Parker. Welcome to Eagle Pass." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I've heard good things about you from Warren." Daniel looked surprised, then pleased. "Have you now? Well, don't believe half of it." He grinned at Warren. "I'd better get back to the men. Those strays won't find themselves." He replaced his hat, nodded to Beatrice, and remounted his horse. After he rode off, Warren turned to Beatrice. "I thought you might like to see more of the ranch this afternoon if you're not too busy with your gardening." "I'd enjoy that very much," she replied eagerly. "Good. I'll saddle a horse for you. Can you ride?" "Yes, though it's been some time," Beatrice admitted. "We used to ride in the park in Boston, but I haven't been on horseback since my father's business failed." "I'll give you a gentle mare," Warren promised. "Meet me at the stables in 15 minutes." Beatrice hurried inside to change into her new riding skirt, another of Warren's purchases from the mercantile. When she arrived at the stables, Warren was waiting with 2 horses, his black stallion and a pretty dappled gray mare. "This is Misty," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's even-tempered and sure-footed, perfect for someone getting reacquainted with riding." He helped Beatrice mount, his hand strong and steady at her waist. The sensation sent an unexpected thrill through her, and she was grateful for the excuse of adjusting her skirts to hide her flushed cheeks. They rode out slowly, giving Beatrice time to find her seat and grow comfortable with Misty's gentle gait. Warren proved to be a patient guide, pointing out landmarks and explaining the operations of the ranch as they went. They rode past herds of cattle grazing in fenced pastures, stopped at one of the wells where a ranch hand was making repairs, and eventually reached a hilltop that afforded a panoramic view of the property. "It's all yours?" Beatrice asked, awed by the expanse of land stretching in all directions. 5,000 acres, Warren confirmed, a hint of pride in his voice. "Not the biggest spread in Texas, but good land, well watered." "It's magnificent," she said sincerely. "You've accomplished so much." Warren looked out over his domain, his expression thoughtful. "It's taken 10 years of hard work. There were times I wasn't sure I'd make it, drought years, problems with rustlers, the fever that took half my herd in 70. But you persevered," Beatrice observed. "I did." He turned to look at her directly. "I want you to understand something, Beatrice. I didn't advertise for a wife because I needed someone to cook my meals or warm my bed, though those things are welcome. I did it because I've built all this, and I want someone to share it with, someone to build a future with." The naked honesty in his voice moved her deeply. "I understand," she said softly, "and I hope I can be that person for you, Warren." His blue eyes held hers for a long moment, and Beatrice felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection, a promise of possibility. The silence was broken by the distant sound of thunder. Warren glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering to the west. "Storm's coming. We should head back." They rode faster on the return journey, but the storm moved swiftly. They were still a mile from the ranch when the first heavy drops began to fall. Within minutes, the rain was coming down in sheets. "There's a lined shack just ahead," Warren called over the downpour. "We can wait it out there." He led the way to a small, sturdy cabin tucked among a stand of oaks. They dismounted quickly, and Warren led the horses to a lean-to shelter attached to the cabin before ushering Beatrice inside. The interior was simple but clean: a single room with a cot, a small table and chair, a cast iron stove, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Warren quickly lit a lamp, then set about starting a fire in the stove. "What is this place?" Beatrice asked, wringing water from her sodden skirts. "Lined shack," Warren replied, feeding kindling into the stove. "For the ranch hands when they're working far from the main house. We have several scattered around the property." Once the fire was going, he straightened and really looked at her for the first time since they'd entered. Beatrice knew she must be a sight, her hair plastered to her head, her clothing soaked through. "You're drenched," Warren said unnecessarily. "Here." He opened a trunk at the foot of the cot and pulled out a woolen blanket. "Wrap yourself in this. There should be coffee and cups on that shelf." Beatrice took the blanket gratefully, but hesitated. "I should remove my wet things first, but—" Understanding dawned in Warren's eyes. "Of course. I'll step outside to check on the horses. Call when you're decent." Once alone, Beatrice quickly removed her soaked dress and petticoats, hanging them near the stove to dry. Left in just her chemise and drawers, which were damp but not soaked, she wrapped the blanket around herself like a shawl. "You can come back in," she called, feeling oddly vulnerable. Warren returned, his own clothing as wet as hers had been. Water dripped from his hair onto his face, following the strong line of his jaw. Something about seeing him like this, less than perfectly composed, made him seem more accessible, more human. "You should get out of those wet clothes too," Beatrice said, then blushed as she realized how forward that sounded. "I mean, I know what you mean," Warren said, his lips twitching with suppressed amusement. "Turn your back, please." Beatrice obliged. focusing her attention on finding the coffee and cups while listening to the sounds of wet fabric being removed. Her imagination provided vivid pictures that made her cheeks burn. "Decent now," Warren announced after a few minutes. She turned to find him wrapped in another blanket, his wet clothes steaming slightly as they hung beside hers near the stove. He had kept his trousers on, she noted with a mixture of relief and strangely disappointment. Beatrice busied herself with preparing coffee while Warren checked the storm's progress through the single window. "It's settling in," he reported. "Might be here a while." An awkward silence fell as they both contemplated their situation alone together, half-dressed, on the eve of their wedding. "Well," Beatrice said brightly, handing him a cup of coffee, "this is certainly an adventure." Warren accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers in the process. "Are you warm enough?" "Yes, thank you. The stove is quite efficient." They sat on opposite sides of the small table, sipping their coffee and listening to the rain pound on the roof. The situation felt oddly intimate, more so than their dinners together or even their chess games. "Tell me more about Boston," Warren said eventually. "What do you miss about it?" Beatrice considered the question. "The ocean," she said finally. "The smell of salt water, the cry of gulls, the way the light changes over the harbor at different times of day." "I've never seen the ocean," Warren admitted. "Never been further east than Virginia, and that was inland." "Perhaps someday we could visit," Beatrice suggested, then immediately worried she'd presumed too much. "That is, if you wanted to." But Warren nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like that, to see where you come from." The simple acceptance of a future together, one that might include travel and adventures, warmed Beatrice more than the stove. The rain continued to drum on the roof, creating a cocoon of isolation around them. In this small cabin, far from the ranch house and other people, Beatrice felt as though they existed in a world of their own, a place outside normal time and rules. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. Warren's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "You may ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough." Beatrice took a breath. "Why did you really advertise for a wife? There must be eligible women in Eagle Pass or the surrounding area." Warren was quiet for so long that Beatrice thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "There are. But I've known most of them since they were children. They see me as Warren Xander, the rancher who came back from the war half dead and built himself a successful spread through sheer stubbornness. And that's not how you want to be seen." He met her eyes. "They know too much about me, and yet not enough. They think they know who I am, but they don't. I wanted someone who would see me as I am now, not as they remember me being." The admission was surprisingly vulnerable coming from such a stoic man. Beatrice found herself deeply moved by his honesty. "And what about you?" Warren asked, turning the tables. "Why respond to an advertisement from a stranger in a place you've never been?" "Necessity, at first," she admitted. "As I told you, my circumstances in Boston had become untenable. But I could have sought a position as a governess or companion. I chose to come here because—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Because I wanted more than just survival. I wanted the chance for a real life, a home, a family. Things I thought I might never have after my father's death." Warren nodded slowly. "And now that you're here, are you disappointed?" Beatrice smiled. "Quite the contrary. Despite losing my trunk, I found far more than I expected." Something flickered in Warren's eyes, a warmth, a hunger that made Beatrice's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he rose abruptly, going to the window again. "The rain's letting up. We should head back before it gets dark." The spell broken, Beatrice nodded and moved to check her clothing. Her dress was still damp but wearable. She turned her back to remove the blanket and put it on, aware of Warren doing the same with his shirt and jacket. When they were both dressed, An awkwardness lingered between them, as if they both sensed that something significant had almost happened in the small line shack. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the landscape freshly washed by the rain and gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight. By mutual unspoken agreement, they didn't discuss what had transpired or nearly transpired during their sheltering from the storm. When they reached the stables, Daniel was waiting, clearly concerned. "Boss, Miss Parker, we were getting worried. Storm came in fast. We took shelter in the East Line shack," Warren explained, dismounting and then helping Beatrice down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Glad you're back safe," Daniel said. "Mrs. Hollister's been fretting, and Reverend Thompson arrived about an hour ago." Warren frowned. "The Reverend? He's not expected until tomorrow for the ceremony. Says he can't make it tomorrow after all, some emergency with a parishioner in Uvalde. He rode through the storm to get here. Says he can perform the ceremony tonight if you're agreeable, or it'll have to wait a couple weeks until he's back in the area." Warren turned to Beatrice, his expression concerned. "I'm sorry about this. We don't have to decide immediately." But Beatrice had already made up her mind. The afternoon in the line shack had confirmed what she'd begun to suspect, that there was something real growing between them, something worth nurturing. "Why wait? Tonight is perfectly acceptable to me," she said calmly. "If it suits you, of course." Warren searched her face, perhaps looking for signs of reluctance. Finding none, he nodded. "Tonight it is, then. Daniel, let Mrs. Hollister and the Reverend know. We'll have the ceremony at 7 after supper." "Will do, boss." Daniel hurried off toward the house. Left alone in the stable yard, Warren and Beatrice regarded each other somewhat shyly. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "We could wait for the Reverend's return. There's no rush." Beatrice shook her head. "I'm certain, Warren. We agreed to marry tomorrow. One day's difference hardly matters." A slow smile spread across his face. "You continue to surprise me, Beatrice Parker." "Soon to be Beatrice Xander," she reminded him, feeling a thrill at saying the name aloud for the first time. His expression softened. "Yes. Very soon." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Hollister insisted that Beatrice have a proper bath before the ceremony, hauling buckets of hot water upstairs herself. Beatrice carefully laundered her face and hands, then donned her new blue silk dress, the one intended for church, and arranged her hair as elegantly as she could manage without assistance. The gold heart pendant Warren had given her completed her wedding ensemble. Studying her reflection in the small mirror, Beatrice hardly recognized herself. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, her eyes bright. She looked happy. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Parker, it's time," Mrs. Hollister called. Beatrice took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts one final time, and opened the door. The housekeeper's eyes filled with tears when she saw her. "Oh, my dear, you look beautiful. Thank you, Mrs. Hollister, for everything you've done to make me feel welcome." The older woman squeezed her hand. "It's been my pleasure. Now let's not keep them waiting." They descended the stairs together. In the parlor, Warren stood by the fireplace with Reverend Thompson, a tall, thin man with kind eyes. Daniel was there as well, serving as witness. Several ranch hands hovered awkwardly by the door, apparently invited to observe the ceremony. But Beatrice had eyes only for Warren. He had changed into a clean black suit, his hair still damp from washing. When he saw her, his expression transformed wonder, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race. Mrs. Hollister guided her to stand beside Warren, then stepped back. The Reverend opened his Bible and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over Beatrice as she stood beside the man who would be her husband. She spoke her responses clearly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. When it came time for the ring, Warren produced the simple gold band they had selected at the mercantile. As he slid it onto her finger, his hands were surprisingly gentle. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice deep and sure. "By the power vested in me," the Reverend concluded, "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." For a moment Warren seemed hesitant. Then, with exquisite care, he cupped Beatrice's face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and reverent. It was her first kiss, and Beatrice felt it down to her toes. When Warren pulled back, his eyes held a promise that made her blush. "Mrs. Xander," he said softly, just for her ears. "Mr. Xander," she replied, her lips curving in a smile. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Mrs. Hollister had prepared a special supper, and someone produced a bottle of champagne that Warren had apparently been saving for the occasion. Toasts were offered, congratulations given. The ranch hands presented them with a gift, a handmade quilt pieced together from scraps of colorful fabric. "The boys all contributed something," Daniel explained. "Jones there used to be a tailor before he took to ranching. He did the stitching." A burly man with a bushy beard nodded shyly when Beatrice expressed her thanks. Eventually, the celebration wound down. The ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse. Daniel took his leave, and Reverend Thompson retired to the guest room that had been prepared for him. Mrs. Hollister approached Beatrice with a knowing smile. "I've moved your things to the master bedroom," she said quietly. "Everything you'll need is there." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister. I'll see you in the morning, my dear." "Not too early," the housekeeper added with a wink before heading to her own quarters off the kitchen. Left alone in the parlor, Warren and Beatrice regarded each other somewhat awkwardly. They were married now legally, binding with all that entailed. "Would you like some tea before we retire?" Warren offered, clearly trying to ease the tension. Beatrice shook her head. "No, thank you. It's been a long day." Warren nodded, extinguishing the lamps one by one until only a single flame illuminated the room. "Shall we go upstairs, then?" He offered his hand, and Beatrice placed hers in it, feeling the strength and warmth of his fingers closing around hers. Together, they climbed the stairs to what was now their shared bedroom. The master bedroom was larger than the guest room where Beatrice had stayed, with a massive four-poster bed dominating the space. A fire burned in the grate, casting a warm glow over the room. Her new clothing had been arranged in the wardrobe alongside Warren's, her brush and combs laid out on the dressing table. Warren closed the door behind them, and for a moment they stood in silence, the weight of expectation heavy between them. "Beatrice," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, if you need time." Understanding his meaning, Beatrice felt a rush of affection for this strong man who was being so considerate of her feelings. In that moment, the last of her reservations melted away. "Warren," she said, stepping closer to him, "I am your wife now in all ways." The look he gave her nearly stopped her heart naked longing, restrained only by his concern for her. "Are you certain?" In answer, Beatrice reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with tentative fingers. "I am certain." With a groan that sounded torn from his very soul, Warren pulled her into his arms, claiming her lips in a kiss far more passionate than the one they had shared during the ceremony. Beatrice responded with instinctive ardor, her arms twining around his neck as she pressed herself against him. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you," Warren confessed when they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily. even when I was dusty and disheveled from the journey. Beatrice teased, feeling suddenly bold. Even then, he confirmed, his hands warm at her waist. You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The rest of the night was a revelation for Beatrice. Warren proved to be a patient and gentle teacher, guiding her through the mysteries of physical love with tender care. For a man of such strength, his touch could be surprisingly delicate when required. And when passion finally overtook them both, Beatrice discovered heights of pleasure she had never imagined possible. Afterward, lying in his arms as the fire burned low in the grate, she felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever had led her to this place, the loss of her family, the desperate circumstances that had driven her to answer a stranger's advertisement, even the loss of her trunk had ultimately brought her to exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking?" Warren asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That's sometimes what seems like misfortune can be a blessing in disguise," she replied honestly. He chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "You're referring to your trunk, among other things." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "If I had arrived with all my fine Boston clothes and my dowry intact, we might have begun differently. You might not have said those words that meant so much to me." "What words?" "You'll want for nothing here," she quoted. "When you said that, even though I was devastated about losing everything, I knew what kind of man you were, the kind who keeps his promises." Warren's eyes darkened with emotion. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Not just material things, Beatrice. I want to give you happiness, security, a family. Everything. We'll build it together," she promised, sealing her words with a kiss. The following morning, Beatrice woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back: the impromptu wedding, the celebration, the night in Warren's arms, her husband's arms. Warren was already awake, watching her with a tender expression that made her heart skip. "Good morning, Mrs. Xander." The name sent a thrill through her. "Good morning, Mr. Xander." He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sleep well." "Very well," she assured him, blushing slightly at the memories of what had preceded sleep. Warren's smile suggested he knew exactly what she was thinking. "Mrs. Hollister will have breakfast ready soon, but there's no rush. Reverend Thompson will be heading back to town this morning." They dressed leisurely, stealing kisses between buttons and laces before making their way downstairs. Mrs. Hollister beamed at them as they entered the kitchen, looking for all the world like a proud mother. "Good morning, dears. Sit, sit. I've made a special breakfast for your first day as man and wife." The table was laden with eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, and fresh fruit, far more than they could possibly eat. Reverend Thompson joined them, offering a blessing on their marriage before taking his leave to return to his parish duties. After breakfast, Warren reluctantly informed Beatrice that he needed to attend to some ranch business. "The work doesn't stop, even for weddings," he explained. "But I'll be back for dinner, and the afternoon is ours." Left to her own devices, Beatrice decided the time had come to begin reclaiming the garden. She changed into one of her simpler dresses, found a sturdy pair of gloves in the tool shed, and set to work clearing the worst of the overgrowth from the flower beds. The labor was satisfying in its own way, cutting back the tangle of weeds and dead growth to reveal the structure that had once existed. By mid-morning, she had cleared one entire bed and could see that, with care, the roses might bloom again this season. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Warren's approach until his shadow fell across her. Looking up, she saw him watching her with an expression of fond amusement. "You've made impressive progress," he commented, surveying her morning's work. Beatrice sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her gloved hand. It's going to be beautiful again. Many of the perennials are still alive beneath all the overgrowth. Warren crouched beside her, examining a rose bush she had carefully pruned. My mother would be pleased to see someone caring for her garden again. He looked up at her, his eyes suddenly serious. I'm glad you're here, Beatrice. The simple statement, delivered with such quiet sincerity, filled her with warmth. I'm glad too, Warren. He helped her to her feet, not seeming to mind the dirt on her gloves and dress. Come with me. I have something to show you. Curious, Beatrice followed him to the stables, where Misty was saddled and waiting alongside Warren's black stallion. Where are we going? You'll see, he replied mysteriously. It's not far. They rode for perhaps half an hour, following a creek that wound through the property until they reached a small valley sheltered by hills on 3 sides. In the center of the valley stood a massive live oak, its sprawling branches creating a natural canopy. Warren dismounted and helped Beatrice down, leading her toward the tree. I found this place my first year in Texas. When things were at their worst, when I was still half-starved from the prison camp and wasn't sure I'd make it out here, I'd come to this spot to think. Beatrice looked around, appreciating the tranquil beauty of the setting. It's lovely. It became a sort of tradition, Warren continued. Whenever I had an important decision to make or something to celebrate, I'd come here. He turned to face her directly. I wanted to bring you here to share it with you. Touched by the gesture, Beatrice reached for his hand. Thank you for showing me. They spread a blanket. Warren had brought in his saddlebag and sat beneath the tree, sharing a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. The conversation flowed easily between them now, the initial awkwardness of their relationship giving way to growing comfort. I've been thinking, Warren said as they finished eating, about what you said, losing your family mementos in the trunk. Beatrice nodded, the pang of loss still fresh despite everything else that had happened. My mother's locket, my father's Bible, they were all I had left of them. I can't replace those exact items, Warren said carefully, but I was wondering if you might like to write to any friends or relatives in Boston who might have other family pieces, photographs, perhaps, or letters. Things that could help you maintain a connection to your past. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. That's very kind of you to think of. Is there anyone who might have such things? Beatrice considered. Perhaps my mother's sister in Philadelphia. We weren't close. She disapproved of my father, but she might have something. Then you should write to her, Warren said decisively. Family connections are important, even difficult ones. I learned that the hard way after losing my parents. They lingered beneath the tree for most of the afternoon, talking of plans for the ranch, the garden, the possibility of children someday. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly packed up the remains of their lunch and mounted their horses for the ride home. Thank you for today, Beatrice said as they approached the ranch, for sharing your special place with me. Warren reached across the space between their horses to take her hand briefly. It's our place now, Beatrice. Everything I have is yours. The days turned into weeks, and gradually Beatrice settled into her role as mistress of the Xander ranch. She established a comfortable routine overseeing the household with Mrs. Hollister's help, working in the garden when weather permitted, learning the operations of the ranch from Warren in the evenings. The garden began to show real signs of revival under her care. By early May, the first roses were blooming, and Beatrice took particular pleasure in cutting fresh flowers for the dinner table each day. Warren, true to his word, ensured she wanted for nothing material. But more importantly, he gave her the space to make the house her own. When she suggested rearranging some of the furniture in the parlor, He readily agreed. When she expressed interest in ordering some new books for the library, he provided funds without question. Their physical relationship deepened alongside their emotional connection. Warren proved to be a considerate and passionate husband, and Beatrice discovered an answering passion within herself that sometimes surprised them both. In early June, Beatrice received a letter from her aunt in Philadelphia. In response to Beatrice's carefully worded request, the older woman had sent a small packet containing several family photographs of Beatrice's parents on their wedding day. Beatrice herself as a small child seated on her father's knee, her mother in the garden of their Boston home. "She kept these all these years," Beatrice marveled, tears in her eyes as she showed the photographs to Warren. "I had no idea." Warren studied the images with interest. "You have your mother's eyes," he observed, "and your father looks like a kind man." "He was," Beatrice confirmed. "Not always practical in business matters, but the most loving father a girl could ask for." That evening, Warren presented her with a surprise, a beautiful silver frame for the photograph of her parents. "For your dressing table," he explained, "so you can see them every day." It was these small gestures, even more than the grander ones, that cemented Beatrice's growing love for her husband. Warren Xander might not be demonstrative in the way some men were, but his actions spoke volumes about his feelings. By midsummer, Beatrice had fully embraced her new life. She had made friends in Eagle Pass, Mrs. Finley from the Mercantile, the doctor's wife, and Mrs. Hollister's niece Abigail, who had indeed loaned her clothes those first difficult days. She had learned to ride confidently enough to accompany Warren on his rounds of the ranch when she wished to. And she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with her husband. They were sitting on the porch one evening in late July, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, when Beatrice finally found the courage to say the words aloud. "I love you, Warren," she said simply, her hand finding his where it rested on the arm of his chair. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the sunset. "Do you indeed?" "Very much," she confirmed, suddenly anxious about his response. Warren lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I have loved you, Beatrice Xander, since the moment you stood in the yard with nothing but a carpetbag to your name and still managed to look as dignified as a queen." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. "You never said." "I'm not a man of many words," he admitted, "but I had hoped my actions would tell you what I felt." "They did," she assured him, leaning over to kiss him softly. "But it's nice to hear the words as well." Warren smiled against her lips. "Then I shall endeavor to say them more often. I love you, my Boston bride." The remainder of the summer passed in golden contentment for the newlyweds. The ranch prospered, the garden flourished, and their bond deepened with each passing day. In August, Beatrice began to suspect a new development in their lives. Her monthly courses, always regular as clockwork, failed to appear. She experienced bouts of morning sickness and found herself unusually tired in the afternoons. She waited another week to be certain before sharing her suspicions with Warren. They were in the garden, where she was teaching him the names of the various roses she had nursed back to health. "This white one is called Prosperity," she explained, then smiled. "Rather fitting, don't you think?" Warren nodded, but his attention seemed elsewhere. "You're looking a bit pale today," he observed. "Are you feeling unwell?" Beatrice took a deep breath. "Not unwell exactly, just different," she met his concerned gaze directly. "Warren, I believe I'm with child." For a moment, he stood absolutely still, as though her words had frozen him in place. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled the birds from the trees, he swept her into his arms, lifting her clear off the ground. "A baby, you're certain?" he asked, setting her carefully back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "As certain as I can be without consulting the doctor," she replied, laughing at his exuberance. "I've been feeling queasy in the mornings, and I'm nearly 2 weeks late." Warren's face glowed with happiness. "A child," he murmured, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child." The town doctor confirmed Beatrice's suspicions the following week, estimating that the baby would arrive in early spring. Warren immediately began making plans: a nursery adjoining their bedroom, a cradle handcrafted by the ranch's carpenter, a rocking chair for Beatrice. "You're going to spoil this child terribly," she teased as they discussed his latest idea: a miniature saddle for when the baby was old enough to ride. "Of course I am," Warren agreed unrepentantly. "Isn't that a father's privilege?" As her body changed with the pregnancy, Warren's tenderness toward her only increased. He insisted she rest more, brought her ginger tea when morning sickness struck, and sometimes simply sat with his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the miracle they had created. The cooler weather of autumn brought welcome relief from the Texas heat. Beatrice continued to work in her garden until Warren insisted she limit her exertions. Instead, she turned her attention to preparing for the baby, sewing tiny garments, knitting blankets, and reading everything she could find about childbirth and infant care. In November, a letter arrived from Boston from Beatrice's cousin, of all people. It contained surprising news. The stagecoach company had recovered her trunk. It had been found, somewhat damaged but largely intact, caught in a tangle of brush downstream from the Nueces River crossing. "They're forwarding it to Eagle Pass," Beatrice told Warren as they sat by the fire in the parlor. "After all this time, I can hardly believe it." "That's wonderful news," Warren said, genuinely pleased for her. "Your family mementos." "Yes," she agreed, her hand automatically going to the gold heart pendant he had given her that first day in town. "Although I've found I can live quite contentedly without most of the other things." Warren smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "You have adapted remarkably well to life in Texas, Mrs. Xander." "It helps to have the right incentive," she replied, returning his smile. The trunk arrived 2 weeks later, water-stained and battered but still securely locked. Beatrice opened it with hands that trembled slightly, unsure what she would find inside after months submerged and exposed to the elements. Many items were ruined beyond recovery. Her Boston dresses were mildewed and rotted. Papers had dissolved into pulp, leather items were cracked and stiff. But wrapped carefully in oilcloth at the very bottom, her father's Bible had survived, as had her mother's locket. "Oh, Warren, look," she exclaimed, holding up the tarnished silver locket. "It's still intact." Warren examined it closely. "The chain is broken, but any jeweler could replace that." "Is there a picture inside?" With trembling fingers, Beatrice opened the locket to reveal a tiny, faded photograph of her parents. "Yes," she whispered, "both of them when they were young." That evening, Warren surprised her yet again. He had sent a rider to town while she was napping in the afternoon, and now he presented her with a delicate silver chain. "For your mother's locket," he explained, "so you can wear it again." Beatrice was too moved to speak, simply holding out the locket so he could thread it onto the new chain and fasten it around her neck. It nestled just above the gold heart he had given her, the old and the new, her past and her present, combined in perfect harmony. "You always seem to know exactly what will bring me joy," she said when she found her voice again. Warren's eyes were soft as he looked at her. "Your happiness is my happiness now, Beatrice. That's what marriage means to me." As winter settled over Eagle Pass, bringing cooler temperatures but little snow, Beatrice's pregnancy progressed smoothly. By Christmas, her condition was unmistakable. her slender frame now sporting a pronounced roundness that Warren found endlessly fascinating. They celebrated the holiday quietly, exchanging simple gifts and hosting a dinner for the ranch hands. Beatrice had insisted that no one should be alone on Christmas, and Warren, who remembered too many solitary holidays after the war, heartily agreed. The new year of 1876 dawned bright with promise. Beatrice's time was drawing near, and preparations for the baby's arrival intensified. Mrs. Hollister insisted on moving into the house temporarily to be available when labor began, and Warren arranged for the doctor to stay at the ranch for the final week of Beatrice's confinement. The baby, however, had plans of its own. On a cold February morning, 2 weeks before her expected time, Beatrice woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. "Warren," she said, shaking her husband's shoulder. "It's time." What followed was a flurry of activity. Mrs. Hollister was summoned, Daniel was dispatched to town to fetch the doctor, and Warren paced the hallway outside their bedroom, torn between concern for his wife and excitement about meeting their child. The labor progressed rapidly for a first birth. By early afternoon, Beatrice's cries had given way to the lusty wails of a newborn. "Mr. Xander," Mrs. Hollister called from the doorway, her face wreathed in smiles. "Come meet your son." Warren entered the bedroom with uncharacteristic hesitation. Beatrice lay propped against the pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "A boy?" he asked, moving to sit carefully on the edge of the bed. "A perfect, healthy boy," Beatrice confirmed, drawing back the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair. "Would you like to hold him?" With infinite care, Warren took the swaddled infant into his arms. The baby's eyes, unfocused but unmistakably blue like his father's, blinked up at him. "Hello, son," Warren whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your pa." Beatrice watched, her heart full to bursting as her strong, stoic husband melted completely in the presence of his newborn child. "What shall we call him?" she asked softly. Warren looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I was thinking, William, after your father, William Thomas Xander." Tears spilled onto Beatrice's cheeks at this unexpected tribute. "It's perfect," she agreed. "Little William." The doctor arrived an hour later, pronounced both mother and child in excellent health, and advised Beatrice to rest as much as possible in the coming days. Warren took this instruction to heart, practically forbidding her to leave the bed for anything other than absolute necessities. "You're being ridiculous," she informed him on the third day of this treatment. "I'm perfectly capable of sitting in a chair by the window, at the very least." Warren frowned. "The doctor said rest." "The doctor did not say I had to be imprisoned in this bed," Beatrice retorted, her patience wearing thin. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Warren. Many of them get up and go right back to work." "Not my wife," he declared stubbornly. Their standoff was interrupted by William's hungry cries from his cradle. Beatrice gave her husband a triumphant look. "Well, someone needs to pick him up, and since I'm confined to bed." Warren grumbled but fetched the baby, settling him carefully in Beatrice's arms for feeding. The sight of his wife nursing their child never failed to fill him with wonder, and his irritation quickly faded. "You're right," he conceded after a moment. Perhaps a chair by the window would be acceptable, but no stairs for at least another week. Beatrice knew when to accept a compromise. "Agreed." By spring, life at the Xander Ranch had adjusted to accommodate its newest resident. William proved to be a good-natured baby, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's sweet disposition. Warren was an attentive father, often carrying the infant with him around the house, or sitting on the porch with William cradled against his chest, while Beatrice worked in the garden. On the one-year anniversary of Beatrice's arrival in Eagle Pass, Warren arranged a special surprise. When she came downstairs that morning, she found a small box waiting beside her breakfast plate. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up curiously. "Open it and see," Warren suggested, bouncing William on his knee. Inside the box lay a delicate bracelet of gold links with a single charm, a tiny trunk. Beatrice looked up, puzzled. "A reminder," Warren explained, "of how our story began." Understanding dawned, and Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "The trunk I lost," Warren nodded. "If you hadn't lost that trunk, I might never have said those words to you, and you might never have seen the kind of man I truly am." "You'll want for nothing here," Beatrice quoted softly. "You've kept that promise in every way that matters." Warren reached across the table to take her hand, his son secure in the crook of his other arm. "And I always will, my love, for all the days of our lives." As Beatrice fastened the bracelet around her wrist, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. A desperate decision to marry a stranger, a lost trunk that had seemed like disaster, a man who had promised she would want for nothing and had given her everything she truly needed: love, family, a place to belong. The trunk had been recovered eventually. But by then, Beatrice had already found something far more valuable: a home in the heart of a good man, and a love that would last a lifetime.